The next speaker is Dr. Anne Fawcett. She's fantastic. I don't know what else I can say about her. She's amazing. Let's just forget that introduction. So I want to thank Gabrielle for highlighting the ethical challenges faced by vets with regards to medication. Because, do I click? I need to click. It's calmer now, isn't it? Next slide, Damien. So I've got a few conflicts of interest to declare first. Obviously, I'm the MC here, and I'm getting paid to do that. I am doing a PhD, and I'm supported for that. I'm the convener of the One Welfare Conference, and that's relevant because I'm going to mention David Fraser in the talk, and he is a keynote speaker. I'm getting no money for that. I'm an unpaid blogger. I haven't updated my blog for a while, so I don't think it's a major issue. I do collaborate with the Cat Protection Society and took some photos of the shelter that I've used in the presentation. I am a vet, and I do draw an income from treating companion animals, so I do like them to be around and alive. And I'm a companion animal owner, but I pay for that a lot. I have a three-legged cat called Hero, whose most recent little adventure was getting onto the freshly painted roof, doing a belly roll onto it, and then walking through the house and sitting on every single piece of furniture that I have. I don't know how you can do that in an hour, but he did it. So I want to talk a little bit about moral stress, what its impacts are, and what types of ethically challenging situations we encounter in rescue, pound and shelter settings, and what tools might we use to better cope with these, and where we need to go from here. So you might have heard about moral stress or moral distress, and that is defined as the experience of psychological distress that results from engaging in or failing to prevent decisions or behaviours that transgress or come to transgress personally held moral or ethical beliefs. So something that's against our values. And it's a situation where we might know the right thing to do or feel like we know what the right thing to do is, but we can't because of constraints or whatever. And Kristen's talked about it a lot. Trisha's talked about it a lot. It's actually come up quite a lot in some of these talks. Professor Bernard Rowland, who some of you might know, he's not a veterinarian, but he spent a lot of time shadowing veterinarians. He's actually a philosopher who's written textbooks on veterinary ethics. And he wrote about moral stress in the context of animal shelters when he first started talking about it in the 80s. And he said, this kind of stress grows out of the radical conflict between one's reasons for entering the field of animal work and what one in fact ends up doing. Imagine the psychological impact of constant demands to kill healthy animals for appalling reasons. The dog is too old to run with me anymore, we've redecorated and the dog no longer matches the colour scheme, it's cheaper to get another dog when I come back from holidays, blah, blah, blah. So that was highlighted by Bernard Rowland, and I actually don't think it was, at the time, much about human mental health. I think he was trying to make the point that we are treating animals so badly that it's actually affecting humans and making us crazy. That's how badly we're treating animals. And I think he was drawing attention to the animal welfare issue, but it happens to be a very sad side effect of the way animals were treated. This is an article that came out in Science Daily recently, which said that over 2.4 million healthy cats and dogs are euthanized every year in the US, most often homeless animals in shelters, according to the HSUS. Shelter workers are then caught in a dilemma because they're charged with caring for an animal that they may ultimately end the animal's life. Research suggests that this causes significant guilt, which can lead to depression, anxiety, and insomnia, as well as greater family work conflict and low job satisfaction. So yoga session won't fix it, mindfulness sessions won't fix it. It's a systemic problem, and when people suffer from moral stress, they basically have to fix the cause or leave the job. That's what happens. But when they're in the thick of it, these are the kinds of signs: anxiety, depression, burnout, physical illnesses, gastro illnesses are really common. Absenteeism, like staying away from work. Presenteeism is where you turn up in body but not really in mind. High staff turnover, workplace conflict. It might be a contributor to work-related stress, or it might be the whole reason you have work-related stress. In extreme cases, it can lead to suicidal ideation, which we've heard about a little bit before, and it can be a contributor to or a primary trigger for suicide. So I wanted to find out what are the types of ethically challenging situations that arise in rescue, pound and shelter situations. And yes, I've worked in those settings myself, but I wanted to look at the literature what are people working in those settings writing about? And there's lots of hypothetical ethical scenarios that are published in the literature for vets and veterinary technicians and nurses. So I found about 700 articles, and about 5% of those were relating to shelters, pounds, rescues, charities, and I did a little thematic analysis using software that looks kind of like that. And I made a pretty word cloud, but that's not really relevant, so I'm going to skip over that. And it's interesting because I picked the top 5 ethically challenging situations I'd encounter in these settings. And number 1, which is very interesting in regards to this conference, is it acceptable to rehome, shelter, pound or rescue organisation animals to less than ideal homes if humane killing is the alternative? And the overwhelming sentiment from this conference seems to be, yes, it is a good idea to rehome them to maybe less than ideal homes. Maybe we need to think about what we mean by ideal. The next one was, is it acceptable for those with financial means to take advantage of low-cost procedures, maybe like dissexing, offered by shelters, pounds, rescue groups, animal welfare charities, and so on? And it's interesting, you might not have seen all the questions that I see on Slido, but a lot of the questions about low-cost initiatives or helping others are about, what about those people that take advantage? What about those rich people that are using the spay-neuter vaccination services? So obviously a dilemma that's experienced by many people working in this sphere. That's my crap attempt to draw a cartoon. But basically, when I asked people who work in these settings what ethically challenging situations they experience, they also talked about things like rehoming animals with behaviour problems, or situations where someone makes a decision to invest lots of money in one animal. Maybe they're charismatic or a special breed, or there's something special about them, they're bonded to a particular staff member, when those funds could be used to rescue a whole lot of other animals. Or disagreements about what constitutes a healthy rehomable animal. So, and baby kittens were one actually that came up a bit. So when it comes to, and this is not a, this little cat is from Cat Protection Society, Athena, and she's lovely and living the dream in their new enclosures at the moment, so she's not in any trouble. But the question, is it acceptable to rehome animals to less than ideal homes? If we want to answer that and have a productive discussion, then I think the first thing to do is identify all the stakeholders. So when I am dealing with an ethical challenge, I think about who's affected, who's got skin in the game here. So that would be obviously the animals, the staff, the potential adopters, maybe the community, and especially with cats, we have to think about wildlife as well. And this is a framework I love to use. If I ever got a tattoo and it wasn't of my late dog Phil, and it wasn't on my late dog cat Michael, it would be of these words, but I'm too fickle to get a tattoo, as you probably can guess. So David Fraser's practical ethic, these are kind of rules for looking after animals, and I really love this. 1, provide good lives for animals in our care. 2, treat suffering with compassion. 3, be mindful of unseen harm. And 4, to protect the life-sustaining processes and balances of nature. It's truly a one welfare framework. It's look after the animals, the people, and the environment. So I love that framework because I think it's a beautiful framework for a discussion. This is not something that you can make an instant decision using. You can't sort of punch in a bit of data and get out an answer. You have to sit around with a group of people who are making these decisions and nut it out. Get a whiteboard or a bit of paper or whatever you need to do and write it all down. So for example, when we think about, well, what does it mean to give a good life to the animals in our care? That's Butter over there, owned by US veterinarian Barry Kipperman, living quite a good life. I think she's got an ideal home. She's a little rescue dog, and you can see her just in front of the grand piano there, sitting on her favourite spot. What do we mean by a good life for animals in our care? What welfare needs are we able to meet in the current setting? And thinking about that, how can we meet their welfare needs in less than ideal homes? And we have to also think about, when we're trying to answer this question as well, how many animals does our shelter admit? We've talked a lot about data in this conference. We need to know the data to feed into this discussion. What is our admission policy? How many animals do we actually rehome? What's the average length of stay? What is the impact of the length of stay on our animals' welfare, given all the things that we do? And then we need to think about suffering. What do we mean by that? What's the extent of it? To what degree does the current environment contribute to animal suffering? To what degree might they suffer less or more in less than ideal homes? To what extent are our staff suffering? To what extent do persons who want to adopt animals suffer if they can't adopt those animals? To what extent does a community member suffer if animals are housed in less than ideal homes? So you might not be the person who adopts, but you might be the neighbour of the animal who's escaping constantly, or the cats that bother the grumpy neighbours, as we heard about before. What about people who don't clean up after their animals? And maybe less obviously, we need to think about other factors. What are the potential harms of rehoming animals to less than ideal homes? So are we going to get increased nuisance and cruelty complaints? What are the potential harms of rehoming animals only to ideal or close to ideal homes? Is that going to, for example, increase the length of stay? Is that going to limit our intake or capacity to care? And then we also need to think about environmental impacts as well. So what are the environmental impacts of stray and unwanted animals, and what are the potential environmental impacts of animals adopted into these less than ideal homes, including their impacts on wildlife? And what's the environmental impact of the shelter? So I'm really interested in Gavin's talk, because I'm hoping that you're going to talk about building like a totally zero environment impact shelter. You're probably not, but in my wild dreams, I would hope that. The other question, I won't go through the analysis, the question about, is it acceptable for those with financial means to take advantage of low-cost procedures offered by shelters, pounds, rescue groups and animal welfare organisations? And I don't know if any of you have read the Access to Veterinary Care Coalition report. You can download it if you just Google that, and there's a link to it in my references. It's really interesting because vets are one of the groups that objects a lot to low-cost clinics. They're seen as competition. And so one of the big concerns is, are these people taking advantage of our lower cost services? We get very indignant about that. And it's been mentioned in another talk also. So that's a real concern for people. And how do we address that? Sometimes data will show that a very small percentage of people actually make the effort to take advantage of those schemes if they're not eligible for them. But we don't know unless we measure it, right? In some way. So again, you can do a stakeholder analysis, and these are the people that I thought might be, or the stakeholders, sorry, that I thought might be impacted. So the animals, the staff at the organisations that offer the low-cost procedures. What about potentially competing private veterinary practice owners, the pet owners with financial means, the pet owners without financial means, and again, the community and the environment. And when you do a utilitarian analysis, you basically, get a piece of paper, you list all the stakeholders, and you write the costs to each stakeholder and also the potential benefits as well. Again, you won't get an easy answer, but what's good about it is if you use this as a discussion tool, everyone feels like you considered everything. And that's the whole point. And ethics, unfortunately, doesn't deliver easy answers, but at least if you feel like you had the discussion, like Kristen talks about her shelter having robust discussions all the time. And it doesn't always end well. And that's okay. But if people feel safe and they know they can bring up concerns and they know they will be heard, then I think you'll get a lot less moral stress. So I think ethically challenging situations are really important to look at because they can also disclose welfare issues that need to be addressed. Do we need to be thinking about actually rehoming animals to less than ideal homes? What does that mean? And are we looking after them properly in the current setting? Understanding those common situations can help us with staff and volunteer training. It can help with policy development. It might help relieve some moral stress. And you might be able to do things like hold ethics rounds or have an ethics committee in your shelter. So hoping the research that I'm doing is going to reveal a broad list of ethically challenging situations that can be used in teaching for vets, vet nurses and animal health technicians. I hope that in the longer term we'll get some insights into the coping strategies that might help people reduce their moral stress, and hopefully we'll get to pilot some ethics rounds and hear from other people. There's heaps of info in your notes, so I've really given a very broad brush overview, but there's a lot of references in there, so if you go to the notes on your lanyard, you can have a look at those. Thank you.